1900 to 1929. Phoenix, Bismarck's Rebirth. The 1898 fire 2 years prior to the start of the 20th century left much of Bismarck in ruin and forced the city to rebuild, propelling Bismarck from its frontier roots into a modern city. Stricter fire codes were enacted as a result. Buildings made of brick and concrete replaced the charred wooden frontier structures. In response, many of these new buildings were labeled as fireproof. Among the most notable structures to be replaced was the Northern Pacific Railroad Depot. The new depot was completed in 1901 at a cost of $33,601. Unique to the region, the depot sports Spanish Mission Revival architecture, designed by the St. Paul firm of Charles Reed and Alan Stem. Also noteworthy, it was one of the first local structures with concrete structural walls. The original Northern Pacific emblems are still visible to this day. Building the new depot forced the relocation of Edward Patterson's Sheridan House Hotel, one of the few downtown buildings to survive the fire, which was renamed the Northwest Hotel upon relocating across the street. 1900, Mandan Central School, Mandan High School, Mandan Junior High. Mandan voters approved a $15,000 bond to fund both a larger West Side grade school and to erect a 3-story brick building housing junior and senior high students, the latter of which would be known as Central School. Central School was expanded numerous times over the years, including a high school addition to its east in 1917 and a gymnasium in 1919. The 1917 addition became the junior high in 1924 when a detached senior high school was erected to the south. Elementary school students occupied the original Central School section at that time. The school complex was expanded several more times, including an elementary school addition in 1954. The original 1900-built section was demolished in 1966. A science wing and gymnasium were added in 1977. The gymnasium sat just north of where the original Central School once stood. Mandan High School relocated to the city's west side in 1957. Mandan Junior High then occupied the former high school section and absorbed the elementary section in 1994. The current Mandan Middle School replaced it in 2008. For the next year, it housed Great Plains Academy. Outside of the original 1900 structure, the rest of the school complex still stands today as affordable apartments. A 380-pound bell that was first installed at Central School in 1914 sits on a pedestal just outside the main entrance. 1901, telephone arrives. Telephone service arrived in 1901. Bismarck Tribune publisher/editor Marshall H. Jewell petitioned for the franchise, who had long published a local directory since 1879 that cataloged population, business locations, and operating hours, and general information about the region. By August, poles and lines were being rapidly installed. The new telephone exchange could handle 125 lines. Clearly in an attempt to appease resistance to adopting the new technology, residential phones were described as smaller and not as clumsy as those being installed at businesses. Phones cost about $14 each, were owned by the telephone company and were included as part of the service bill, which was $1.50 per month for residential and $2 per month for businesses. Telephone operators, located inside the First National Bank building, were treated to a modern electric light system alerting them when someone either made a call to the switchboard or hung up the receiver rather than the traditional bell. It was said to be easier to monitor which lines were in use. Concrete or brick sidewalk ordinance. In another evolution from its frontier beginning, the City Commission passed an ordinance requiring all sidewalks henceforth to be made of either brick or cement. Finney Drug. Founded that year, Finney Drug was a long-time downtown fixture, operating until 1993 when it became Mayo Pharmacy. Bert Finney and E.S. Beardsley originated the drugstore at 108 North 4th Street inside the First National Bank building. The drugstore relocated to the Grand Pacific Hotel in 1908, the same year Beardsley stepped down from the business. In 1948, the store expanded into an adjacent space, once occupied by Paper Dollar Bar. Its iconic soda fountain was discontinued on March 1, 1969. Finney Drug remained at the Grand Pacific Hotel until the building was marked for demolition through urban renewal, relocating to the Wards Building in September 1973. Ironically, Beardsley's residence once stood on the Wards Building site. Finney Drug relocated again, in April 1989, across the street to 303 North 4th Street, formerly occupied by GP Sporting Goods. After Beardsley's departure, Finney operated his namesake store independently until John Johnson partnered in 1940. Finney retired 6 years later and sold his interest to Johnson, who died just 2 months later. James Tyler then purchased part ownership and operated the pharmacy alongside Johnson's widow, Merle. Tyler retired in about 1963 and sold his interest to two longtime pharmacists named John Craven and Andrew Vernig. Merle Johnson retired in April 1973 and Craven acquired full ownership from Vernig in 1982. Craven himself retired in April 1993, when Dan Mayo took over the pharmacy. It became Mayo Pharmacy at that point and still resides at Finney Drug's last location. For some time, Finney's was affiliated with national drug chain Walgreens, advertising itself as a Walgreens agency drugstore. 1902, Address Ordinance. In July 1902, Bismarck adopted a formal ordinance governing the designation of addresses. The ordinance was the result of establishing free postal delivery, expected to begin on September 1 of that year. While the ordinance has evolved over the years, it principally remains the foundation of street addresses to this day. The system apparently caused mass confusion for years. It was up to each business and residence to determine and display their address. Many businesses and residents employed the incorrect number, as placed on their building and in the phone directory. Until at least 1907, the Tribune featured articles with detailed explanations of the system. Complicating matters, there were repeated attempts to change it until at least the 1910s. In fact, one commissioner in 1916 proposed the bold notion of renaming all of Bismarck's streets, starting fresh. Q&R Clinic. Doctors Eric P. Quain and Niles O. Ramstad founded the nation's second oldest surviving clinic, behind only Mayo Clinic, in 1902. Q&R Clinic was housed on the second floor of a downtown bank until relocating to 221 North 5th Street in 1927. That building was expanded several times, in 1953, 1966, and 1973 before the clinic joined with longtime partner Bismarck Hospital, soon to be renamed MedCenter 1, in 1983 to build a 6-story clinic to the hospital's south. The two merged in 1993 and were acquired by Sanford Health in 2012. 1903, Motion Pictures. Using 6 projectors, the traveling Beatty brothers premiered the first moving picture at the Bismarck Athenaeum, a stage house erected at 810 Main Avenue in 1883 and later called Bijou Theater from about 1909. Sources vary on the year that this first motion picture premiered, with one citing 1902 and another 1907. For sure, it happened as soon as 1903 as advertised in the Tribune on June 2 of that year. Both Bismarck and Mandan have boasted several movie theaters over the years. Among the earliest to be successful were Eltinge Theater in 1918, later Paramount Theater, then Bismarck Theater, Orpheum, later Capitol Cinema, and Dakota Theater in 1951, and Mandan's Main Street, 1936, and Palace Theaters. Local movie theaters contained a single screen until the 1970s, beginning with Kirkwood Plaza's movie theater becoming North Dakota's first to feature dual screens, later becoming the first in the state with 3 screens after Kirkwood Mall's 1980 expansion. Today, Grand Theater, Bismarck Mandan's lone movie house, contains 22 screens. The first Technicolor film was shown in 1928, synchronized audio in 1929, and three-dimensional in 1953. President Roosevelt visits. President Theodore Roosevelt visited Bismarck and Mandan the afternoon of April 7, 1903. He passed through after visiting Fargo, Valley City, and Jamestown earlier that same day. While here, Roosevelt spoke from the Capitol balcony about returning to his home country, achieving great applause upon acknowledging that he was a pretty old settler to the area himself. He met with a delegation of chiefs from the Sioux, Mandan, Arikara, and Gros Ventre tribes. He presented a pipe of peace, a carved pipestone and tobacco pouch, to John Grass, charging bull, of the Sioux tribe. Roosevelt was treated to a barbecue with a roast beef sandwich before departing for Dickinson on his way to his beloved Medora. Roosevelt was the first sitting president to visit Bismarck. Grant did so at the Capitol's cornerstone ceremony, but it was after he left office. Wilson would visit in 1919, speaking from the city auditorium as he campaigned for the League of Nations. Franklin Roosevelt visited in 1936 to inspect drought conditions, Eisenhower in 1953 to dedicate Garrison Dam, George H. W. Bush in 1989 to celebrate the state's centennial, Obama in 2014 en route to Fort Yates, and Trump in 2017 to speak at the Mandan Oil Refinery. Kennedy campaigned here before being elected. Hayes never visited Bismarck, but owned a huge farmstead at Section 3 in Range 80 of today's Hay Creek Township on the northern fringe of Bismarck, then 5 miles north of the city. Northern Pacific Railway gifted him the land. Charles M. Cushman managed the property for Hayes, apparently breeding hens there. Joseph Getney of Columbus, Ohio purchased it in 1885. As of 1963, the land was owned by Arthur Kinnicksky, who sold it in about 1973. 1904, St. Joseph Church. Mandan's St. Joseph Church was dedicated in November 1904. Depending on the source, the cornerstone was laid in either April or July of that year. Various relics were placed beneath the cornerstone. It cost about $40,000 to construct. Father Daniel Collins personally contributed more than $13,000. He was laid to rest inside the church after he died in 1909. Milwaukee architect Anton Doman was the church's architect. Doman would design a total of 5 North Dakota churches, and presented preliminary designs for a Bismarck cathedral that were abandoned due to the Depression. A school and gymnasium were added to the church's northeast in 1952. The parish was organized in 1881 and construction commenced that fall for the parish's first church on the corner of Stark Avenue and 3rd Street. Stark Avenue is today called Collins Avenue. Streetcar. In 1904, a state-owned streetcar line was established connecting downtown with the Capitol. The line operates until February 28, 1931 in the aftermath of the original Capitol's destruction. 1905, Will School, last Capitol execution, replacing bridge superstructure. Construction on the Will School commenced in 1905. The site, now home to the Provident Building, once housed the city's first 2-room schoolhouse. It was named for Oscar H. Will, a local entrepreneur. The school closed in December 1951 when it was replaced by present-day Wilmore Elementary, but the building continued as office space until being demolished in 1954. Bismarck's last Capitol execution took place at the penitentiary. The practice will be outlawed in 1915. The original superstructure of the Northern Pacific Railway bridge was replaced with steel that can handle heavier loads. The original granite piers, which still support the bridge to this day, were also shored up. 1906, Chamber of Commerce. In 1906, the beginnings of the Bismarck-Mandan Chamber of Commerce was founded as the Bismarck Commercial Club. Changing politics, Mackenzie machine collapses. In a rare power swing, Democrats took the state's top office as voters elected John Burke governor against incumbent Republican Elmore Y. Sarles with a 4,000-vote majority. Democrat Charles Fisk was also elected judge of the Supreme Court. It was only the second time in North Dakota's history that a non-Republican held the governor's office. More importantly, the win signaled the crumbling of Alexander Mackenzie's political machine that had dominated politics since before North Dakota was even a state. Sarles did win majority for both Burleigh and Morton counties, where Mackenzie's influence was most prevalent, but it wasn't enough support to win the entirety of the state. The 1908 election 2 years later killed what was left of the Mackenzie machine. While Republicans regained control after Burke left office in 1913, the meddling days of the capitalist favoring Alexander Mackenzie were over. Serving from 1913 to 1917, Governor Hanna was a conservative Republican, but the progressive movement was taking root, and the socialist-leaning Farmers' Nonpartisan League branch of Republicans secured power during the 1916 election and continued to hold a strong influence until the late 1930s. The Nonpartisan League later merged with North Dakota's Democratic Party. If there was one man who knew how to pick a winning side, it was Edward Patterson, who was both a Mackenzie machine deputy and later a prominent member of the Nonpartisan League, headquartered at his hotels. After Governor Burke, Democrats wouldn't control the state's executive branch again until Thomas H. Moody in 1935, who served less than a month in office when he was deemed ineligible and replaced by his Republican lieutenant, Walter Welford. Burke campaigned heavily for Woodrow Wilson's presidential run and was expected to hold a cabinet position under him. Burke was under strong consideration for Wilson's vice president, but instead became Treasurer of the United States. He later served as a justice of the North Dakota Supreme Court. A statue of Burke now stands south of the North Dakota Capitol Tower and in Washington, D.C. at the United States Capitol's National Statuary Hall. Sioux Hotel. Edward Patterson, who also owned the Northwest Hotel, completed the Sioux Hotel that year, opening New Year's Day, 1907. The hotel was named to honor the Sioux Line Railroad, which established service to Minot from Bismarck beginning September 2, 1907. The Sioux Hotel was constructed on the former site of stores occupied by B.E. Jones and William O'Hara. When first announced, the building was to be 3 stories containing 65 rooms. Upon completion, however, the 4-story modern brick structure contained 93 rooms, each of which containing hot and cold running water. It was the tallest building in the city at the time, surpassed 4 years later by Patterson's own 7-story Mackenzie Hotel built immediately next door. A walkway was opened between the two hotels so patrons of the Sioux Hotel could benefit from the added amenities of the Mackenzie/Patterson Hotel. In about 1927, Patterson renamed the hotel Princess Hotel, allegedly as a spoof on the Prince Hotel, which was owned by his chief rival Edmund Hughes. The hotel was again renamed Patterson Annex in 1931 after completing a major remodel. Today, the building houses apartments on the upper floors and retail on the main floor. The original Sioux Hotel nameplate is still visible on the north side of the building. 1907. Estimated Bismarck building in 1907 was just shy of $785,000. This may have been a new record at the time, but records are imprecise to know with certainty. The Tribune published an exhaustive list of projects. Government-owned projects supercharged this figure, including an addition to the county courthouse and construction of the Bismarck Indian School. The $150,000 addition to the state penitentiary was the largest project that year. There were some big-scale private buildings undergoing construction that year as well, most notably the Grand Pacific Hotel, Eppinger Philbrick Block, and St. Mary's School. The Bismarck Evangelic Hospital was not included in the Tribune's estimates for some reason, which commenced construction that year and was finished at the end of 1908. Bismarck Evangelical Hospital, MedCenter 1/Sanford Health. Bismarck Hospital was founded in 1907 as German Evangelical Hospital. The name changed to Bismarck Hospital in 1955, MedCenter 1 in 1984, and Sanford Health in 2012. Dr. Niles Ramstad is credited with bringing the hospital to Bismarck as opposed to fellow contenders Jamestown and Aberdeen. The story goes that Ramstad promised $10,000 to bring the hospital to Bismarck. In the end, Ramstad and Dr. Quain together provided $50,000 to open the hospital. Their involvement immediately established a partnership between the hospital and Q&R Clinic. A ceremonial cornerstone was laid in May 1907, but it wouldn't be until July 30 that the hospital board awarded a contract to Milstead and Person to construct a 100-bed hospital on the site for $104,000. Bismarck Evangelical Hospital first admitted patients, 6 of them, on February 2, 1909, even though contractors were still completing construction. While it was built for a 100-bed capacity, it only had 60 upon opening. In those early days, competition between Bismarck's two hospitals was almost non-existent. Instead, the two hospitals complemented each other by offering services the other did not. Dr. Quain was a surgeon for both St. Alexius and Bismarck Hospital while also serving as Chief of Staff for Bismarck Hospital from 1939 until his retirement in 1949. It was Ramstead who arguably kept the two hospitals from competing because competition first kindled not much after his retirement. It escalated in the 1980s and 1990s as the two competed for dominance. Bismarck Hospital's first edition was completed in either 1913 or 1914, followed by a second in 1917. New wings to its south and east were added during the 1950s, beginning with a $306,000, one source says $500,000, four-story addition in 1950 that was dedicated in 1952. The other commenced in about 1953, first building out the shell for a new wing and fully finishing it between 1955 to 1956. This increased bed capacity to 185, one source says 230. In 1974, a $5.5 million expansion demolished most of the hospital facility that was constructed before the additions of the 1950s. A $500,000 heart center was added in the summer of 1979. The partnership between Q&R Clinic and Bismarck Hospital strengthened when the two paired for a $23 million expansion in 1983, building a four-story addition to the hospital and six-story tower for the clinic to its south. Bismarck Hospital became MedCenter 1 the following year. The two merged in 1993. Sanford Health acquired them in 2012. Numerous medical firsts have been attributed to Q&R Clinic and the affiliated Bismarck Hospital. In 1912, Dr. Quain imported the first supply of Novocaine into the United States, introducing it as a local anesthetic. About that same year, Bismarck Evangelical Hospital was the first hospital in western North Dakota to have an X-ray machine. Q&R Clinic was among the first institutions to use radium as a treatment and began utilizing electroencephalography in 1951. Minot Sioux Line service. While the Sioux Line first reached Bismarck in August 1902 to compete with Northern Pacific, the more significant milestone was when Sioux Line commenced direct train service to Minot on September 2, 1907. Passengers could depart Bismarck in the morning and arrive in Minot that evening, with a 30-minute lunch break in Max, just south of Minot. Prior to this, rail access to Minot was only achieved from its east, which meant traveling there from Bismarck required traveling first to Fargo, then north and west from there. Grand Pacific Hotel. In 1907, a modern brick structure was completed immediately south of the Pacific Hotel at the northeast corner of 4th Street and Broadway Avenue for about $60,000. The new building became the Grand Pacific Hotel. The new hotel was marketed as a first-class lodging facility and directed connected to its Pacific Hotel predecessor. The grand new wing contained 60 rooms, 2 of which with private baths, along with a billiard room, cafe, bowling alleys, and what was touted as the city's finest barber shop complete with Turkish baths. In conjunction with the original Pacific Hotel, the two properties contained 120 rooms. In 1912, the original Pacific Hotel building was replaced with a 4-story brick annex structure that was molded into the 1907 Grand Pacific Hotel addition. In 1915, a fire badly damaged the hotel, forcing the 8-year-old building to undergo extensive renovation. The Grand Pacific Hotel housed other entities, including Four Seasons Hall and Finney Drug. Indian School. Bismarck Indian School was established in 1907 at the former site of Milwaukee Brewery, now Frayne Barracks, home of North Dakota's National Guard. The school was approved by an act of Congress in 1901 and opened in 1908. It became an all-girls school in 1922 and closed in 1937. Cowan Drug. J.G. Cowan originated Cowan Drug in 1907 when he acquired the B.E. Jones Drug Store, where he was employed as a pharmacist. It was then located at 414 Main Avenue. A second store later opened at 206 N 4th before they were consolidated in 1916 into the Cupid's Building, which became the Cowan Building when the Cowans purchased it in 1921. The building was later expanded to reach the alley, where Black Hills Stage Line was housed for some time. It renovated and expanded greatly, adding 3 stories, in 1955. Cowan Drug temporarily vacated its namesake building in 1969 when it relocated to 411 North 4th Street, which was previously home to Red Owl. It reoccupied the Cowan Building in 1972. Cowan Drug closed in 1994 and the Cowan family sold their namesake building to the Boutros Group that same year. Knowles Jewelry. Knowles and Hanley Jewelers became established that year when the business succeeded J.B. Cook & Company. Hanley's interest remained until about 1917 or 1918. It has resided in the same building at 119 North 4th Street during its entire existence, where the J.B. Cook store was previously housed. 1908, Masonic Temple. Ground was broken in the fall of 1908 for a new Masonic temple at 117 North 3rd Street. The building, when occupied in about 1911, will be 105 x 65 feet. Lots were first purchased a few years prior, with additional lots purchased in 1902. It is occupied from 1911 to 1964 before First National Bank of Bismarck acquired it, and the adjacent Prisca property, to build a branch there containing a drive-up window. At that time, a replacement Masonic temple was erected on Meadowlark Hill near Bismarck Junior College. The 3rd Street parking ramp now occupies the site. Company A Armory. An armory for Company A of the North Dakota National Guard was dedicated in December 1908. It was located on the southeast corner of Broadway Avenue and 2nd Street. The building was also utilized as an entertainment and athletic hall for dances, basketball games, and other events. The building was rebuilt in 1920 for Dakota Motor, adding a second story. Provident Life again rebuilt the building for its new headquarters in 1937. It's unclear how much of the original armory building remains in today's structure. City records indicate it was built in 1910, which contradicts the building's original 1908 dedication. Announcements for each of the 1920 and 1937 projects clearly stated it was being rebuilt, but it was common at the time for builders to repurpose existing building materials and even the foundation. 1909, First Municipal Park. Added with the completion of its new train depot in 1901, Northern Pacific Railway developed Depot Park as Bismarck's first gathering green space. Efforts to establish a city park came to a head in 1909, spearheaded by the Women's Community Council, who beautified 2 vacant lots at the corner of 5th Street and Main Avenue. That same year, the Civic Improvement League, who previously coordinated with Northern Pacific Railway to embellish Depot Park, agreed to secure a plot of land for a permanent city park, dedicated as Custer Park. Land was obtained in 1910 for $585, $100 of which donated by Colonel C.B. Little. It initially consisted of 4 acres between Washington Street and what was then called West Park Street, now West Custer Park Street, and Main to Rosser Avenues. A small lake was originally planned, but never implemented. Oscar Will donated 100 trees to be planted that spring. In October, a landscape architect was hired to design a plan for the park. Over the next 4 years, more than $1,000 of improvements were made to the park, including 400 trees, 150 shrubs, water pipes, walking paths, and a retaining wall across Rosser Avenue. By 1915, the city employed a caretaker for the park. Between 1915 to 1919, the city funded another $1,400 towards the park. Today, Custer Park is most recognized for its eagle statue that was dedicated in 1988 to commemorate the bicentennial of the United States Constitution. The establishment of Custer Park was the start of what would eventually become Bismarck Parks and Recreation, which was formally established in 1927. Automobiles. While there were already a couple automobiles owned by Bismarck's elite by 1909, it was on March 3 of that year that the first advertisement by a local firm for the modern mode of transportation first appeared. Miller and Lahr placed the ad for a Ford Model T, cost $850 without a top. In addition to Lahr, other notable early automobile dealerships included Bismarck Implement Company, Missouri Valley Motors, Fleck Motors, and what became Corwin Churchill Motors, today's ID Chrysler. Vehicle registration tags were first required in 1911. 6,615 tags had been issued by July of that year statewide. 1910. By 1910, Bismarck had grown to nearly 5,000 people and the city had fully recovered from the devastating fire just 12 years earlier. The decade saw great prosperity, but also a major change in the political landscape as the Mackenzie machine fell from power and gave rise to the Nonpartisan League, which shifted the balance of power away from big business. Bismarck ushered in a mass of public projects, from several schools to a public library, a city auditorium, and the first vehicular bridge spanning the Missouri River. Mandan flooding. That spring, Mandan fell victim to its worst flooding since 1881 when water overflowed the dikes at both the Missouri and Heart rivers. Much of the south side was flooded, especially in the Syndicate neighborhood to the southwest. Floating ice chunks as long as 30 feet broke poles carrying lines for electricity and communications. The railroad was covered in both ice and water. Ice piles were as high as 10 feet. Flooding would be a recurring problem for Mandan. The first attempt as flood prevention came the way of a 160-foot dam constructed along the Heart River at a cost of almost $5,700. Mandan's worst flooding would be witnessed in 1943. With the next 10 years, the Heart Butte and Garrison dams greatly reduced Mandan flooding. Most recently, Mandan felt the effects of the 2009 and 2011 floods. Sacagawea Statue. The Sacagawea statue was dedicated on October 14 on the grounds of the state capitol. The statue depicts the Shoshone woman who, along with her infant child, accompanied explorers Lewis and Clark during their famed expedition through the region. The Sacagawea Committee who championed for the bronze statue included a number of prominent women, including Dr. Fanny Dunquain. Mr. Leonard Crunell of Chicago was its sculptor. Bismarck Grocery Company Warehouse. Bismarck Grocery Company began constructing a warehouse on the southwest corner of Main Avenue and 6th Street, today known as the Civic Square Building. The company was found in 1902 with an original location inside the historic Dakota block, northeast corner of Main Avenue and 2nd Street. The new warehouse was completed in 1912. Many today remember it as the home of Front Page Tavern in the 1980s. By the 1990s, the building deteriorated to the point where it was unsafe and in risk of demolition. Remodeled at a cost of $600,000 in 2007, today it is known as the Civic Square Professional Building. 1911, Mackenzie Hotel. Owned by Edward Patterson and named to honor his friend, political boss Alexander Mackenzie, the prominent Mackenzie Hotel, later renamed Patterson Hotel, opened on New Year's Day, 1911. During its 67 years operating as a hotel, it hosted 4 U.S. presidents, among other celebrities. Constructed in only 8 months at a cost of $150,000, the hotel represented the most modern construction techniques of the era. The Mackenzie Hotel was North Dakota's first building constructed with steel-reinforced concrete. It was advertised as absolutely fireproof and shockproof, in reference to Bismarck's devastating 1898 fire and San Francisco's 1906 earthquake. The hotel underwent continued construction until at least the 1930s, ultimately expanding from 7 stories to 10. This was done, at least partially, to exploit a loophole where property taxes couldn't be collected on a building undergoing construction. Patterson settled a tax case filed against him relating to his abuse of this loophole on January 2, 1936 for $58,807. Deemed North Dakota's first skyscraper, the building was the tallest in the state until the current Capitol's completion in 1934. It was upon realizing the impracticality of acquiring an additional 25 feet of frontage along Main Avenue that Patterson opted to build vertically. Even at that, the original objective was only a 5-story structure with a foundation designed to support additional stories to be later added, reportedly up to 20 stories. Upon opening, it was the largest hotel within a 4-state region and contained the most private baths, 84, of any building in the state. The Mackenzie was reputed to be the most luxurious hotel between Minneapolis and Seattle. The building featured an electric elevator and marble staircase. Furnishings included marble top tables and mahogany furniture. Housed inside were a modern barber shop, billiards room, and Turkish, Russian, sea and plain baths. The Patterson Hotel was a major gathering place for politicians and businessmen alike. This especially held true after 1921, when it became home to the Nonpartisan League after the League's former headquarters at the Northwest Hotel, which Patterson also owned, was destroyed by fire. The Mackenzie was notorious for its illicit activities during its infancy, including illegal alcohol sales, gambling, and alleged prostitution. The hotel even installed an electronic alarm system to keep out unwanted guests from interfering with its affairs. International Harvester Company. International Harvester completed its warehouse that March on the northwest corner of Main Avenue and Mandan Street. Based in Chicago, International Harvester Company specialized in agricultural machinery and construction equipment. International Harvester Company was formed when J.P. Morgan purchased McCormick Harvesting Machine Company, Deering Harvester Company, and 3 smaller companies in 1902 and reorganized them under the same banner. International Harvester sold its agriculture business in 1985 and soon after changed its name to Navy Star International Corporation. International Harvester vacated the warehouse in the late 1930s. From 1954 until 1968, it was home to Conrad Publishing Company, whose letters are still slightly visible beneath the current signage. Following Conrad's absence, the building was renovated into its current multi-use purpose, with office and commercial space occupying the lower levels and apartments above. Today, it is known as the L. J. Anderson Building, named for Lauren J. Anderson. For many years, it was home to Dave's Hobbies and Boyd's Ark Pet Store. The company's showroom, which operated as the I.H. McCormick Store, was located on the southwest corner of Broadway Avenue and Mandan Street. The building has more recently housed One Source Lighting and Proximal 50 Life Center. Prior to that, it was home to an automotive supply store. Marshall Oil Warehouse. Marshall Oil Company of Marshalltown, Iowa commenced construction of a 90 x 50-foot brick building on North 3rd Street near Front Avenue in August. Sinclair Refining Company later acquired Marshall's interests in the city, who continued operating out of the building. The building later housed Fargo Paper Company, known today as Cole Papers. It has housed Borrowed Bucks Roadhouse since 1994. New Fire and City Hall. Bismarck awarded $14,778 to architect Arthur Van Horn and contractor John L. Larson Company to construct a combined city/fire hall on the 500 block of East Thayer Avenue, across from Burleigh County Courthouse, which also houses the city's police department. It contained 2 service garage doors, housing within it horses for the horse-drawn firefighting equipment. The building was demolished in 1980 along with the neighboring Carnegie Library building. Passing of a pioneer, Linda Slaughter. One of Bismarck's most important historical figures died that year. Linda Warfel Slaughter was a pioneering women's rights activist, school superintendent, postmistress, journalist, historian, attorney, artist, and one of Bismarck's earliest residents, having arrived with her husband in 1872, when Bismarck was still Edmonton. Among other achievements, Linda Slaughter established the first local school and was the first woman to vote for a presidential candidate at a national convention. Linda Slaughter was born on February 1, 1843 in Candice, Ohio. She was educated at Oberlin College before relocating to Kentucky and Tennessee as a missionary overseeing schools and churches for freed slaves. Linda met her future husband, Dr. Benjamin Franklin Slaughter, in 1868. He was an Army surgeon who was ordered to relocate to Dakota Territory's Fort Rice in 1871. The following year, the Slaughters settled in what is now Bismarck-Mandan after Dr. Slaughter was ordered to report at the newly established Camp Greeley/Hancock. The pair arrived aboard the Ida Stockdale from Fort Rice on August 8, 1872. That same month, Linda Slaughter established the first local school, Sabbath School, a Presbyterian Sunday school, at Camp Hancock on August 24, 1872. She went on to establish Bismarck Academy in 1873, where she served as superintendent until 1882. In 1876, she was appointed Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction for Dakota Territory. A prominent women's activist, Slaughter organized the local chapter for the Ladies' Historical Society in 1889. She was also a founding member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and active in other female-focused organizations. In 1892, as a party delegate, Linda Slaughter was the first woman to vote for a presidential candidate at a national convention. She became a licensed attorney in Washington, D.C. in 1895, where she became friends with historical figure Susan B. Anthony. Linda died in St. Cloud, Minnesota in 1911. With her husband, she had 3 daughters. 1912. While not a record, Bismarck boasted about construction surpassing $500,000 in 1912. Buildings under construction or expected to begin that year included the Federal Building, completed in 1913, City Auditorium, completed in 1914, a Standard Oil warehouse on Front Avenue, a Webb Brothers commercial block on North 5th Street, the Grand Pacific Hotel 4-story annex, a 2-story commercial block on the corner of 3rd Street and Broadway Avenue, and at least 60 private residences totaling $180,000. Edmund Hughes was erecting 3 buildings, a 3-story apartment house on the 100 block of 3rd Street, a commercial building on North 4th Street north of the Tribune/Hoskins block, and an 80 x 25-foot building east of the Dakota block on Main Avenue. All but one of those are no longer standing. Bismarck's first designated high school, Mandan's Custer School. The first designated high school building opened in 1912. The current Bismarck High School was built to its north in 1935, at which time the original high school building became a junior high until 1962. The building was demolished that year as its replacement, today's Simley Middle School, completed construction. Across the river, Mandan dedicated Custer School that April. It stood 3 stories. 1913, Federal Building. Bismarck's first federal building was completed in July 1913 at a cost of about $150,000. The 3-story steel-framed building is 100 x 64 feet and sports a white limestone ashlar veneer and distinctive red-tiled roof. The building was expanded north in 1937. It continues to house federal offices, but was supplemented by the William Guy Federal Building in 1964. 1914, City Auditorium, Belle-Mayeuse. Designed by prominent local architect Arthur Van Horn, the Bismarck City Auditorium opened in January 1914. The facility was renamed Belle-Mayeuse Auditorium in 1989 to honor a local music teacher. In 1996, the Belle-Mayeuse Auditorium underwent a major renovation at a cost of $2.5 million. Corwin Churchill. Samuel Wickham Corwin established a dealership in 1914 that originally sold Buick, Saxon, and Mitchell automobile brands before becoming one of the first distributors of the Chrysler nameplate when it was introduced in 1924. 1 year later, Neil Churchill joined the dealership. In 1937, the company purchased Murphy Motor in Fargo. Corwin moved to Fargo to head up operations there, while Churchill continued to manage the Bismarck location. During World War II, the company temporarily switched its focus on wholesale automobile parts distribution. Churchill retired in 1952 and sold his interest to the Corwin family. The Hewitt family purchased the Bismarck dealership from the Corwins 6 years later, in 1958, and continued its operation for the next 5 decades until 2010, when Minot-based Ryan Auto Group purchased and renamed the dealership Ryan Dodge. ID Ford purchased it in 2016, when it became ID Chrysler. Corwin Churchill was also an appliance dealer in downtown Bismarck, operating from 1935 to 2015. The Hewitt family maintained its ownership upon closure. Woodmansey's founding. Harry Woodmansey and William Harris founded a stationery and office supply store in 1914. The store was co-owned by the duo until the early 1930s, when Harris sold his interest. The Woodmanseys continued family ownership until selling to Fireside Office Solutions in 2018. From 1929 to 2018, the store was located at 114 North 4th Street, the original home of longtime department store A.W. Lucas. In 2018, they relocated to 1722 Mandan Avenue in Mandan shortly before Fireside Office Solutions acquired the company and merged the brands under the Fireside banner. 1915, the Nonpartisan League. Established in 1915, the Nonpartisan League, NPL, quickly elevated into the state's dominating political force, ushering in a new progressive movement for the state that opposed the previously commanding big business-centered Mackenzie machine. Just 1 year after formation, in 1916, NPL member Lynn Frazier was elected governor with 79% of the vote. The NPL also won control of both houses in the 1918 election. The Nonpartisan League shepherded socialistic reforms, some of which continue to influence North Dakota to this day. It was during this reign that North Dakota implemented the state-owned Bank of North Dakota and North Dakota Mill and Elevator, both of which remain today and are arguably the League's most enduring legacies. The NPL's dominance came to a temporary end, when in 1921, Governor Frazier was recalled from his position. The NPL wouldn't regain supremacy until 1932, when their most infamous member, William Wild Bill Langer, was elected governor. While never holding formal office, Edward Patterson was among the most influential figures within the League, headquartering the NPL at his Northwest Hotel until relocating to the Patterson Hotel in 1921, following the Northwest Hotel's destruction. Ironically, the NPL was now housed at the hotel once bearing the name of rival Alexander Mackenzie. Despite its origins as a faction within the Republican Party, the Nonpartisan League merged with North Dakota's Democratic Party in 1956 to form the North Dakota Democratic, Nonpartisan League Party, DNPL. Cloverdale Foods. Dairy farmer Hoy Russell originated Cloverdale Foods as Mandan Creamery in 1915. It began offering premium pork products soon after. During the 1950s to 1970s, Cloverdale shifted focus towards its meat line and food distribution as bigger dairy companies eroded market share. Cloverdale fully divested its other operations in 1995. Today, it is one of the area's largest employers and one of North Dakota's most valuable privately owned enterprises. St. Alexius relocates to present-day site. St. Alexius relocated from its original home inside the former Lamborn Hotel to its present-day location in 1915. Its new hospital, which faced 9th Street, opened March 15 with 125 beds. St. Alexius employed 18 surgeons and physicians at the time. Most of this original building still exists today, although future expansions have largely engulfed it. 1916, city streets paved. First special assessment. After years of discussion and lobbying, Bismarck finally committed to paving its streets in 1916, 3 years behind neighboring Mandan. The $500,000 paving project proceeded after the city's biggest landholders signed petitions agreeing to special assessments to fund it. To this day, special assessments remain a chief financing vehicle for public street maintenance. The resulting project encompassed 161 blocks spanning 9 miles. It was touted that Bismarck would possess the most paved streets of any other city below 10,000 residents. Each landowner would be assessed $2.95 per front foot, or $147.50 for a 50-foot lot, spread over 20 years. The City Commission authorized the project on August 3 and opened bids August 28. Efforts were divided into 6 districts, with the first comprising downtown. Paving commenced on Broadway Avenue between 2nd and 4th Streets that September, followed soon after on Main Avenue. Van Horn, Prince, Hotel. Edmund Hughes completed the Van Horn Hotel, named for its architect, Arthur Van Horn, in 1916 for roughly $100,000. Located at 113 North 3rd Street, it was renamed Prince Hotel in 1926 upon completing an 18-room north wing addition to the main building. The new name was chosen to honor the president of Merchants Trust Company, J. A. Prince. The hotel was soon after purchased by local entrepreneur and philanthropist Neil Churchill. The Blue Blazer Lounge was housed inside. The Prince Hotel remained in operation until the late 1970s. It was renamed Kensington Hotel shortly before closing. From 1999 to 2005, the building housed Sunrise Senior Living. The building sat mainly vacant for years until being converted into efficiency apartments in 2010. Fellow hotel proprietor Edward Patterson perceived Edmund Hughes as his chief rival and, in response to Hughes renaming the hotel Prince Hotel, Patterson temporarily renamed the Sioux Hotel Princess Hotel as a jab to his rival before again renaming it the Patterson Annex. Jack Lyons. Having already started previous restaurants, Jack Lyons probably didn't realize how iconic and cherished the hamburger joint he founded in 1916 would become. It operated on Broadway Avenue between 5th and 6th Streets, where the Parkade now sits. Earl Swartz continued the business when Lyons no longer could. Lyons died in 1947 and Swartz in 1963. The restaurant was still operating as of 1965, but had closed by 1967 when J.C. Penney opened a baby store there. The restaurant was so iconic that local butchers and restaurants advertised what they referred to as Jack Lyons-style hamburgers until at least the 1980s. Bad winter, BRRRR, that's cold. 1916 witnessed particularly bad winter weather, setting 2 long-standing records. At the beginning of the year, on January 13, Bismarck recorded the lowest temperature on record, -45 degrees Fahrenheit. It is matched once more, on February 16, 1936, but never surpassed. Bismarck got close again on January 15, 2009, missing the record by 1 degree. At the end of the year, December set a record of 21.7 inches, the most ever recorded for that month until 2008. First airplane flights. While there was an attempt to fly an airplane from the Morton County Fairgrounds to Bismarck as early as 1911, pilot Lucky Bob of Carrington was forced to make an emergency landing of his biplane Sweetheart before reaching the capital city. In Fargo only a few days earlier, he did make what was likely the first successful airplane flight in North Dakota. It wasn't until 1916 that an airplane successfully flew over Bismarck, but Chicago aviator Daredevil Mills crashed upon landing east of the Capitol building. The plane flipped upside down, but was flying again by the next day. Until sometime in the 1920s, local airplanes landed in a cow pasture across the street of what would later be Jerry's Supper Club on the Strip. It was then moved to lowlands on South Washington Street until today's Bismarck Airport first occupied its present-day site in 1931. Morton/Grant County split. Grant County formed upon splitting a southwestern portion of Morton County in 1916. Carson was named its county seat. There have been other attempts to split up Morton County, including setting a new boundary around New Salem, but all have failed. 1917, World War I. World War I heated up and diverted attention in 1917. In the next few years, Bismarck will dedicate the Liberty Memorial Bridge, Liberty Memorial Building, and World War Memorial Building for veterans of World War I. Mandan development seemed to be most prominent that year. The city had recently completed an additional $300,000 worth of street paving the previous year, having paved its first streets in 1913 ahead of Bismarck. The Lewis and Clark Hotel and a new dedicated high school completed in 1917. Lewis and Clark Hotel. Mandan's Lewis and Clark Hotel was completed in the fall of 1917. Fargo businessman and former North Dakota Governor Hanna acquired its predecessor, the Interocean Hotel, 2 years prior for about $20,000. The Interocean had been operating almost since Mandan's inception. Hanna demolished the original hotel soon after to erect the replacement Lewis and Clark Hotel at a cost somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000. These were quite impressive sums for the era, comparable to about $4 million today, and the 4-story pressed brick Lewis and Clark Hotel became well reputed. The Hanna family maintained ownership until 1985, when a group of investors acquired the property and remodeled it into apartments with the help of Meta bond financing. Dan Hanna was a partner in the investment firm, which also included William Claremont. In recent years, this historic building hasn't been well maintained and is starting to decline. Mandan High School. The commencement of Mandan's school year was delayed until October in 1917. The delay was twofold. First, staff shortages resulting from faculty involved in the war. Second was a delay in finishing construction of a dedicated high school being built onto the east side of Central School. Cost necessitated the high school being added onto the existing schoolhouse rather than being independently constructed. Central School had been housing both junior and senior high school students since its completion in 1900. A detached Mandan High School was erected immediately south of Central School in 1924 and it remained there until 1957. See the previous section covering Central School for more history. 1918, Carnegie Library. Bismarck's first public library, a Carnegie Library, opened in 1918 through funds largely donated by Andrew Carnegie. Veterans Memorial Public Library replaced Carnegie Library in 1963 and the building was demolished in 1980, along with the neighboring 1911 built City/Hall building. Marshall Jewell and C.M. Dahl initiated the first effort to establish a Bismarck Public Library in 1893. Other efforts, including one led by Governor Hanna in 1901, also failed. Plans for Bismarck's first public library progressed in 1915 upon reorganizing the commercial club. One of its first acts was to appoint a library committee, who immediately corresponded with the Carnegie Foundation. At the time, Bismarck was North Dakota's only city with more than 3,000 residents that didn't have a public library. The public's only access to free books was at the Commission's collection at the Capitol. A temporary city library consisting of 2,000 books, mostly community contributed, was established in the Commercial Club and formally dedicated on February 22, 1916. The original response from the Carnegie Foundation was discouraging. The funding offered was considered inadequate, due in part to the Foundation's perception that Bismarck was a small town. It took convincing the Foundation that Bismarck was larger and more important than its footprint and population suggested. Finally, the Foundation approved $25,000 for a public library in Bismarck. As a condition for receiving the grant, Bismarck was required to furnish a site and financially support the library at a cost of no less than $2,500 per year. Residents overwhelmingly approved the appropriations in spring 1916. The library would stand on Thayer Avenue across from the Burleigh County Courthouse and next to the City Hall. Construction completed at the end of 1917, the existing library's contents were transferred on January 5, 1918, and the library was formally dedicated on February 22, 1918, the second anniversary of the public library's formal inception. Wachter School opens, North Ward renamed William Moore School. Wachter School was the first of 3 new Bismarck schools to open over the next 5 years. It was located on Bowen Avenue and cost about $19,000 to build. It originally housed 4 rooms and was one of the first permanent structures erected south of the railroad tracks. Additions followed in 1930 and 1953. Wachter School was named for the Wachter patriarch, Gottlieb Charles Wachter, who had recently retired from the school board. Keeping to the Wachter theme, Paul Wachter was born that same year. He would be instrumental in evolving the family business into real estate development and investment, most notably with Kirkwood Mall. Also in 1918, the North Ward School, constructed in 1884, was renamed William Moore School to honor the man who served as Bismarck's school superintendent from 1890-5-1908. Moore was instrumental in modernizing Bismarck's education system, including converting the high school from a 2-year program into a standard 4-year program in 1897. Fleck Motors established. One of the most enduring local automobile dealerships, Fleck Motors, came to Mandan in 1918 and Bismarck soon after. It ultimately became Nastrom Peterson Motors, and again Wilhelm before closing in 2007. Its longtime showroom at 100 West Broadway Avenue was demolished in 2009 for Broadway Center. R.J. Fleck was previously a breeder of driving and saddle horses in Richardson, North Dakota before he recognized the horseless carriage revolution and founded an automobile dealership there with his father in 1915. It originally sold Marion Handley, Imperial, and Dort vehicles. In 1917, Fleck obtained its long-standing Buick franchise agreement from an Underwood firm, Hendricks and Landgren. Fleck's relocated its dealership to Mandan in 1918, and opened a Bismarck location in 1921, first operating a garage and service station at 215 East Main Avenue. Its Mandan location was sold in 1925. Its Bismarck dealership moved in or about 1927 to 618 East Main Avenue. In 1931, Fleck moved its operations to the former Ingstad Garage building at 100 W Broadway, where it remained for decades. Built in 1928, it was the largest single-story garage in North Dakota at the time. Fleck Motors added a 60-foot glass showroom to the building's south side. Beginning in 1942, the firm began dealing Alice Chalmers farm equipment. Fleck also operated at 102 West Main Avenue as of 1949. That same year, Fleck announced plans to construct a new 2-story garage, an independent Oldsmobile dealership, on the 300 block of Main Avenue, now home to Fleck's Furniture and Appliance. To commemorate the dealership's opening, in 1950, Fleck hosted the General Motors Mid-Century $100,000 Auto Show. That same year, Fleck opened an independent Oldsmobile dealership. R.J.'s son, John R., later joined the operations. John was also majority owner of Universal Motor Company, a local Ford dealership opened in 1934. John's ownership in both a Ford and General Motors dealership caused major controversy. Another controversy rang out in 1945 revolving the fact that the Ford dealership was managed by Earl Tucker, instead of John Fleck, who was the majority owner, a violation in Ford's agreement, which stated that the manager of a dealership must also own majority stock. Mr. Fleck was told he either had to sell his interest in the company, or return to active management. He chose not to return to manage the dealership and sold his interest in Universal Motor Company. After selling his stock in Universal Motor Company, Fleck continued to operate Fleck Motors with his brother, Jack Fleck. John's son, Robert J. Fleck, joined the dealership in 1956. Fire gutted the Fleck's showroom on Broadway Avenue on April 30, 1951. At the end of that year, Fleck's opened a warehouse and service station at 1105 East Main Avenue. Ned Nastrom and Donald Peterson purchased Fleck Motors in 1972, which became Nastrom Peterson Motors. At the time, it was the city's largest new car dealer. Nastrom acquired Peterson's interest in 1979. In 1986, ownership nearly returned to the Fleck family when a group that included John Fleck's grandson, Dan Porter, of Dickinson-based Dan Porter Motors, sought to purchase the dealership. This deal ultimately fell through, at which point Jamestown-based Wilhelm bought the dealership. It closed in 2007, a victim of General Motors' reorganization. The buildings were demolished in 2010 for Broadway Center. Spanish flu. The so-called Spanish flu hit home that fall when the first 5 local deaths attributed to the virus were reported by October 16. A Bismarck native, Sergeant Joseph Murray, died 2 days previously at Camp Pike, Arkansas. He is considered Bismarck's first casualty, despite that the death did not occur here. The virus continued to make headlines for months with deaths reported regularly. Much like the coronavirus pandemic that extended to North Dakota in March 2020, schools shuttered and public gatherings were strongly discouraged to help prevent spread. Schools didn't reopen until November 12, churches 3 days prior. 1919, Bank of North Dakota. The nation's only state-owned bank, Bank of North Dakota, was established in June 1919. It occupied the former Missouri Valley Motors building at Main and 7th until 2008 when its current headquarters were completed. President Wilson visits. President Woodrow Wilson visited Bismarck on September 10, speaking at the City Auditorium. He was campaigning for his vision of a League of Nations. Yegan Dairy. In 1919, the Yegans expanded into the dairy business, becoming one of the region's primary dairy producers until its acquisition by the Bridgman Division of Land O'Lakes in 1966. John Yegan was among Bismarck's first settlers, opening a restaurant and bakery from a tent in the summer of 1872. John's first permanent store was located at 416 Main Street but burned down in 1877. He rebuilt at the same location, where it remained until 1913. 1920, Tribune relocates. Twice. By 1920, World War I had ended and America was booming. Bismarck's population stood at more than 7,000 citizens. At the end of 1919, the Bismarck Tribune outgrew its namesake Tribune block on the northwest corner of Broadway and 4th, today home to KFYR-TV. The periodical had occupied the Tribune block since its completion shortly after the 1898 fire, expanding it twice, in 1908 and 1913. The Tribune moved into what was then Bismarck's oldest brick building, the Gusner Block, on the southeast corner of Main Avenue and 3rd Street. Fire destroyed the Gusner Block 1 month later, on January 21, 1920. It was the third time fire ravaged the newspaper's home. It was then that the Tribune constructed its longtime home at 224 North 4th Street on the southwest corner of 4th and Thayer, which was completed later that same year. A second building was built to its immediate west in about 1972. It remained there until relocating to its present building, on the southeast corner of 7th Street and Front Avenue, in July 1980, constructed for $3 million. Richhold School. 2 years after the opening of Wachter School, Richhold School opened in 1920. It was named for Frank H. Richhold, who died in 1918 and was the son of longtime school board member Henry Richhold. Additions followed in 1950 and 1953. It was later replaced by a new Richhold Elementary, which itself controversially closed in 2003, but the building is still in use as the Bismarck Early Childhood Education Program, BISEP. Fire damages Mandan Train Depot. Fire greatly damaged Mandan's train depot, which was built in 1882 as the city's first permanent depot. Most of the damage, estimated at roughly $15,000, was contained to its second story. The fire was believed to have been ignited by the sparks of a train engine. Ordinarily, replacing the aging structure would have been likely. However, Northern Pacific was facing strained finances at the time and opted instead to repair the building rather than fully replace it. It continues serving as Mandan's depot until 1930. 1921, Northwest Hotel destroyed. The Northwest Hotel, whose core comprised one of Bismarck's oldest buildings, was destroyed by fire on October 27, 1921. In its aftermath, the influential nonpartisan League's headquarters relocated across the street to the Mackenzie Hotel, both of which were owned by Edward Patterson. The hotel originated on the present-day site of the former train depot as the Sheridan House in 1877, constructed by E. H. Bly at a cost of $50,000. It was the city's largest building until the 1880s. The Sheridan House was the first hotel owned and operated by Edward Patterson, who purchased the hotel in 1893 with partner E. S. Allen. Patterson became the hotel's sole proprietor the following year. When the train depot was destroyed in the 1898 fire, Northern Pacific sought to build its new depot where the Sheridan House stood, on land owned by the railroad. Patterson used most of the Sheridan House's materials to construct the Northwest Hotel directly across the street, which was then brick veneered. 1922, Liberty Memorial Bridge. 1922 was a momentous year in many ways. Most importantly, the year witnessed the completion of the region's first vehicular bridge across the Missouri River. 1922 also saw the passing of one of Bismarck's most infamous pioneers and the arrival of Bismarck's first national department store. Congress authorized constructing the Liberty Memorial Bridge in February 1919 with the Army Engineer Corps approving the bridge that November. Bids were opened on May 14, 1920. The project was awarded to the American Bridge Company. Its construction was problematic. For one thing, river currents carried away several constructing trestles. When dedicated in September 1922, the Liberty Memorial Bridge was the only vehicular bridge to cross the Missouri River within 500 miles, allowing direct vehicular travel between Bismarck and Mandan. The three-day dedication ceremony began September 18 with over 12,000 attendees. Named to honor World War I veterans, the Liberty Memorial Bridge became part of U.S. Highway 10 when it was formally inaugurated soon after. By 1924, the same year Memorial Highway between Bismarck and Mandan was dedicated, more than 2,000 vehicles per day crossed the bridge. Its piers were more than 200 feet tall and the span ran almost half a mile. As the major connector between Bismarck and Mandan, many thriving businesses eventually sprouted nearby and it greatly boosted Mandan, which by then had more than 4,000 residents, by increasing access between the two cities. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1997. Replaced by the four-lane new Liberty Memorial Bridge, the original bridge closed to traffic in August 2008 and it was demolished that October. Passing of a pioneer, Alexander Mackenzie. June 22, 1922 saw the passing of one of Bismarck's most influential, and sometimes infamous, pioneers, Alexander Mackenzie. Leaving behind an incredible local legacy, Mackenzie received a state funeral with honor guards at the North Dakota state capitol. Likely the state's first millionaire, Mackenzie leveraged his clout with the Northern Pacific Railroad to amass a fortune with investments in multiple industries, both inside and outside of North Dakota, and to form a powerful political organization penned the Mackenzie Machine, which dominated local politics from the 1880s until about 1908. He acquired numerous real estate investments, served as director of both First National and Capital National Banks, and commanded early utilities. Mackenzie established the city's first water system in 1886 and backed the first electric franchise in 1887, which put him at odds with ally-turned-nemesis Alexander Hughes and his son, Edmund. This adversarial relationship carried over to Edward Patterson, an early deputy for the Mackenzie Machine. Little is known about Mackenzie's early life, with details in dispute. It is generally accepted that Alexander Mackenzie was born on April 3, 1850 in Ontario, Canada. He quit school at only 11 years old to seek his fortune. At some point, Mackenzie resided in New York, where he worked as an elevator operator. While employed in this position, Mackenzie sustained life-lingering injuries when the elevator plummeted 8 or 9 stories. According to most reports, Mackenzie arrived in Dakota Territory in 1866, at age 16, where he later became a scout for General Custer. He dabbled in several industries, including the railroad, where he secured important connections to become an influential agent for Northern Pacific. Mackenzie was illiterate when he was first appointed Burleigh County Sheriff in 1874, but his menacing size aided him in maintaining law and order in the otherwise lawless county. He was elected to this position 6 times and later became a deputy U.S. Marshal. Eventually, a friend, George Flannery, taught him to read and write. Mackenzie's influence began in the early 1880s when the Northern Pacific Railway appointed him their chief political operative for the territory. Originally a Democrat, Mackenzie was cognizant of the Republican stronghold in Dakota Territory, so he switched parties in 1882. Consequently, Mackenzie served as the state's Republican National Committeeman for 2 decades. In 1883, Mackenzie was elected to the Capital Commission, tasked by law to select a new capital for Dakota Territory. It was in this role that Mackenzie first made his mark on history and propelled his political dominance. Acting under Northern Pacific guidance, it was Mackenzie who procured enough votes for Bismarck to become capital, convincing Alexander Hughes to cast the deciding vote. That same year, Mackenzie organized an exhibition to the Minnesota State Fair that included Sitting Bull, Gaul, Crazy Horse, and John Grass. Engineering the surprising capital acquisition for Bismarck powered Mackenzie's political clout. For years, the Mackenzie machine dictated politics in the region. Although he himself never held political office, Mackenzie leveraged his stature to decide who represented his party and indirectly coerced decrees in his favor. In 1899, Mackenzie's investments turned to the gold mines of Alaska, which led to his ultimate arrest in 1901. He also owned mines in Arizona and British Columbia. He was arrested in 1901 for fraud relating to Alaskan gold mine rights and served 3 months in prison before pardoned by President McKinley. Mackenzie achieved national celebrity status from a 1906 novel called The Spoilers, which was a fictionalized account loosely based on Mackenzie's attempted takeover of the Alaskan gold mines. The novel was made into a 1942 movie featuring John Wayne. Mackenzie favored big business, which directly influenced the creation of the competing Nonpartisan League, ironically later housed at the hotel once bearing his name. Mackenzie's political stronghold unraveled by 1908, when he vacated his national committeeman position after 2 decades. In later life, Mackenzie permanently relocated to St. Paul, where he died on June 22, 1922, reportedly 2 days after learning of the death of his wife, Eva, who had passed roughly 1 month prior. He received a state funeral with honor guards at the North Dakota State Capitol and was interred at St. Mary's Cemetery. Despite his influential history, his grave remained unmarked until a group of local pioneers dedicated a granite marker in 1938. Shortly after his death, surprising new details in Mackenzie's personal life came to light when it was revealed that he had successfully kept a secret family for more than 30 years, from even his closest friends and family for reasons unknown. His wife Eva, some sources say Elva, Stewart, a Bismarck school teacher, whom he married in 1890, and their 3 children together. He previously married Mary Ellen Hare in 1877, having 3 children with her. The pair divorced in 1887, at which time Mackenzie bought a house in St. Paul, Minnesota for them to reside in. First National Department Store, F.W. Woolworth. F.W. Woolworth opened at 406 Main Avenue inside a new eastern addition to the City National Bank building. It was the first national department store to take up residence in the city, although J.C. Penney had opened a Mandan store 2 years prior, in 1920. According to at least one source, a Bismarck Tribune article from September 12, 1940, Woolworth opened its first Bismarck store in 1917, however there are no references to a Bismarck Woolworth store until opening its store at 406 East Main Avenue in 1922. Woolworth relocated into the original section of the City National Bank building, immediately next door at 402 to 404 Main Avenue, in October 1930. It renovated that location in 1940 and remained there for the next 4 decades. A second store opened at Kirkwood Mall in 1970. Woolworth was the first store to open at Kirkwood, which was named for Woolworth's former CEO. Robert Kirkwood served as Bismarck store manager from 1932 to 1939. In 1980, Woolworths converted its Kirkwood store into Woolco, the chain's discount department store division. It was the only Woolco to ever operate in North Dakota. The downtown Woolworth closed in 1981, and its Kirkwood Woolco in 1983 when the entire 336 chain Woolco division was discontinued nationwide. It wouldn't be until 1928 that another national retail chain opened a Bismarck store, when Montgomery Ward's opened in the former Lar Motor Sales building at the northwest corner of 4th and Thayer. J.C. Penney followed with a Bismarck store in 1929 upon its purchase of McCracken's local Golden Rule store. Golden Rule was a retail syndicate once affiliated with J.C. Penney. Even with opening in Bismarck, Penney's continued its Mandan store until at least the 1930s. Penney's and Ward's will both later follow Woolworth's lead by relocating to Kirkwood Mall. Ward's shuttered in 1999, shortly before the company's nationwide liquidation. Syndicate School, Mark Stark Elementary. Mandan constructed the Syndicate School to the southwest in a part of the city once developed by a group of investors known as the Boston Syndicate. The school expanded in 1964, and was replaced by the current Mary Stark Elementary on the same site in 1970. Mary Stark was a longtime teacher of more than 50 years, since 1909. She taught at the Syndicate School, likely from its inception, and was its eventual principal. She died in 1960. Other happenings. Bismarck High School introduces the Demon mascot. Municipal ballpark establishes on South Washington Street. Hoskins becomes Hoskins Meyer when Philip Meyer partners with wife Etta and her brother Brooks, children of R.D. Hoskins. 1923, Waterworks becomes public. In 1923, Bismarck voters shut down the private water system, first established by the recently passed Alexander Mackenzie in 1886, upon approving a bond to fund a new municipal filtration plant. The city acquired Bismarck Water Company for $265,000, down from the original asking price of $318,000 offered by company head Judge George Flannery, who was executor of Mackenzie's estate. Construction immediately commenced on a new filtration plant and bids sought to renovate the water plant. Remembering Arthur W. Lucas. Arthur W. Lucas, the prominent businessman and politician who is best known for co-founding the highly successful department store A.W. Lucas Company, passed away on September 27, 1923. Lucas also served various roles in local politics, including mayor from 1913 to 1921. 1924, Liberty Memorial Building, Lucas relocates. By this time, the Capitol building was overflowing. Consideration for a replacement was ongoing. In the interim, construction was completed in 1924 on the Liberty Memorial Building, located adjacent to the Capitol. That same year, A.W. Lucas Company completed construction of its new store, adjacent to its original location. The last of 3 recent schools to open, the original Roosevelt School opened in 1924. The current Roosevelt Elementary replaced it in 1975, its playground was the site of the first Roosevelt School. MDU. The humble beginnings of today's Montana-Dakota Utilities, MDU, started as Minnesotan Northern Power Company in 1924. Back then, the utility company served only a small group of farming communities, mostly concentrated on the border of Montana and North Dakota. MDU was headquartered in Minneapolis until 1968, when it was relocated to Bismarck. It was then that it erected a 5-story office building on the northwest corner of 4th and Rosser for an estimated $1.8 million. MDU built a new corporate campus in 2004 at 1200 West Century Avenue where it now resides. Today, MDU is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded utility company with operations in 48 U.S. states. It is North Dakota's only Fortune 500 company. It operates several subsidiaries, including WBI Energy, Knife River Corporation, and Cascade Natural Gas. Mandan's Roosevelt statue. Henry Waldo Coe, a pioneer doctor, donated a bronze statue depicting former President Theodore Roosevelt as a colonel in the Spanish-American War. The statue was dedicated July 4, 1924 and placed inside Park area east of Mandan's Northern Pacific Depot, today known as Heritage Park. It was relocated in 1930 to its present-day location facing 3rd Avenue Northwest upon dedicating a new train depot. Coe also donated Roosevelt statues to Portland, Oregon and Minot. 1925, KFYR Radio. Philip Meyer and his wife Etta Hoskins Meyer founded KFYR, a 10-watt AM radio station, in 1925. Test broadcasts began that October with KFYR's first official broadcast being the Elk Band concert on February 8, 1926. Its call letters are in homage to Philip Meyer. Substituting F for PH. The radio studio was located in the music room of the Hoskins-Meyer building, in the same building housing KFYR-TV today. Until erecting a dedicated transmitter tower in 1930, which was the second tallest man-made structure in the nation at the time, KFYR's signal broadcasted from a rooftop antenna. In 1966, one source says 1963, KFYR established an FM counterpart on 92.9, now Y93, KYYY. Jaser Communications, then the nation's third-largest radio broadcaster, acquired both radio stations in 1998 for a reported $4.8 million. Today, KFYR Radio, along with sister station KYYY, Y93, are owned by iHeartMedia, Incorporated, previously Clear Channel Communications. Hughes Field. A proponent of education, despite his own dislike of schooling, Edmund Hughes purchased and donated lots to the school district in 1925 for use as an athletic field. Hughes Field was dedicated 2 years later. Hughes Junior High was later built adjacent to the field. St. Alexius Boniface Hall. St. Alexius completed a 4-story dedicated nursing school, appropriately named Boniface Hall for Sister Boniface, the administrator who evolved St. Alexius into a modern and viable hospital. Boniface Hall was built east of the main hospital, facing 10th Street. These two buildings looked remarkably similar and are often confused in historic photographic references. One easy way to differentiate the two are the main entrance staircases, with Boniface Halls curving around from 2 approaches. The windows are also slightly different. Boniface Hall was demolished in 1999 as part of a $12 million expansion targeted at improving the hospital's outpatient services. St. Alexius graduated its first class of nursing students in either 1915 or 1918, depending on the source. The program was phased out in 1960 when St. Alexius partnered with Mary College. One of the first buildings erected at today's University of Mary campus is called Boniface Hall. 1926, City National Bank fails. City National Bank failed in October 1926. It was in business since 1909. First National Bank capitalized on the failure of its competitor by advertising that its assets of $500,000 were mostly in cash and liquid securities. First National Bank survives today as U.S. Bank. Other banks to fail around this time included Bismarck Bank and Capital Security Bank. In the first years of the looming Great Depression, Mandan's Farmers State Bank and First State Bank also shuttered. 1927, Will School expands, Bismarck Park District establishes. In 1927, Will School added 3 additional rooms and the Bismarck Park Board, now Bismarck Parks and Recreation, was formally organized. Within a year, the Park District maintained 5 parks, including the already established Custer Park, as well as Kiwanis, Tatley Eagles, Riverside/Sartoma, and Hillside/Lions. Pioneer and 16th Street parks are added between 1931 to 1932. It won't be until 1955 that the district dedicates another park. Myron Atkinson, located east of State Street from the Capitol. U.S. Highway 10, Old Red Trail. The stretch of U.S. Highway 10 through North Dakota commenced development in 1927 and was largely completed the following year. Much of what became the highway were pre-existing roads, including Bismarck's Main Avenue, part of which is today's Memorial Highway leading to the Liberty Memorial Bridge and the strip on the Mandan side of the bridge. Old Red Trail, first organized by the Automobile Club of America and the American Trailblazing Association in 1915, was designated U.S. Highway 10 2 years earlier, in 1925. Originally, most of the highway was a gravel road outside of major cities. The stretch between Fargo and Mapleton was first to be paved, commencing in 1931. Red Owl. Red Owl opened its first local stores in both Bismarck and Mandan in 1927. Bismarck's store was located on Main Avenue. Mandan was located at 114 2nd Avenue Northwest until a new 7,800 square foot store was erected at 206 4th Avenue Northwest, where it remained for the remainder of its existence. Red Owl continued expanding its local presence over the decades, growing into the region's predominant grocer at its peak. A second Bismarck location opened on Broadway Avenue in 1928. Sometime in the 1930s, Red Owl closed its Main Avenue location upon expanding its Broadway store. In 1952, Red Owl opened a location at the intersection of 4th Street and Avenue A. Red Owl would later relocate its Broadway store to 715 East Broadway Avenue. When Northbrook Mall opened in 1963, Red Owl was established as an anchor, along with its corporate sibling, department store Tempo. It continued operating both locations. Its dominance came to an end by the mid-1980s. Mandan's store closed in 1987 while Bismarck's two stores were renovated and rebranded Fresh Mart Foods, only to close 2 years later. 1928, Hillside Park. The earliest effort to establish what was then called East End Park commenced in early 1928, when the Park Board purchased $3,000 worth of lots east and north of Rich Holt School, with options for an additional $7,000. Later, the Bismarck Park Board leased land from the St. Mary's Cemetery Association for 99 years at a cost of $1. By summer 1928, roughly 1,000 trees were planted in what was officially penned Hillside Park, including 400 elms and another 400 to 500 cottonwoods and boxelders. The local Lions clubs have been a longtime sponsor of the park, including a $1,000 donation in 1950 for the first playground equipment located there. The pool was added in 1956 and renovated in 2015. The skateboard park was first added in 1998. The park began a major overhaul in 2009. Riverside Park, Sartoma. Riverside Park first opened in 1928. It featured picnic tables and a children's park containing equipment furnished by the Kiwanis Club, a slide, swings, and teeter-totters. A tourist camp was located to its north and an athletic field on the south side. Today, it is better known by the name of its longtime sponsor, the Sartoma Club. The Super Slide amusement park became established there in 1967. Hughes Electric sold. United Power and Light acquired Hughes Electric and its subsidiaries in 1928. United later merged with Northern P&L, based in Mobridge, South Dakota, before being sold to Montana Dakota Utilities in 1945. Hughes serviced electricity to about 1/4 of North Dakota when it acquired Mandan Electric 3 years earlier. 1929, Talkies, bank changes. In 1929, the first talkies, motion pictures with relatively synchronized audio, debuted at the Paramount Theater on North 3rd Street near Broadway Avenue with a comedy film called Fast Company. While the audio was intended to be synchronized, it was played separately through a phonograph and not always spot on with events of the picture. It cost Paramount Theater about $11,000 to install the audio equipment. Several banks changed hands. First National Bank was sold to First Bank Stock Corporation of Minneapolis, now U.S. Bank, and the First Guarantee Bank was sold to Northwest Bancorp, also of Minneapolis, now Wells Fargo. Passing of a pioneer, John Yegan. Bismarck pioneer John Yegan died that year. He opened one of Bismarck's first businesses, a restaurant and bakery inside a tent in 1872. He also operated a grocery store for some time, but he is best remembered for founding Yegan Dairy in 1919, which is today part of Land O'Lakes. At one time, the Yegans owned most of the land in southeastern Bismarck, including much of present-day Lincoln and the land that now holds the Bismarck Airport. Today's Yegan Road, located in that area, is named for in the family's honor. Passing of a pioneer, Charles Cupits. Also dying that year was Charles Cupits in September. Cupits was a pioneering local businessman who arrived with the 7th Cavalry in 1873, stationed at Fort Abraham Lincoln. After his enlistment, he saw great success through his stagecoach line and grocery store. His most enduring legacy was constructing today's Cowan Building in 1898, which was originally known as the Cupits Building. Cupits was born in either 1844 or 1845 in Prussia, Germany. He moved to England at age 17 and served 2 years as an assistant steward aboard a ship. Then, at age 19, he emigrated to America, settling in New York, where he worked at a hotel. He enlisted in the Army in about 1869, where he was assigned to the 7th Cavalry in the Kansas-Nebraska Territory. He served under General Custer, apparently with strong opposition to Custer's brutality against Native Americans. Cupits relocated with the 7th Cavalry to Fort Abraham Lincoln in 1873 and completed his 5-year enlistment the following year. He then engaged in farming for some time before taking up staging in the late 1870s. At one time, he ran 3 stage lines, to Fort Rice and Fort Yates, with 23 horses. During this time, he held the government mail contracts. When he lost the mail contracts due to underbidding, he commenced freighting to the Black Hills, but found inhibited success. Upon returning to Bismarck, he established a meat and grocery store on Main Avenue between 4th and 5th Streets. After the store was destroyed by fire, he partnered with Tim Griffin to open a similar store at the corner of 4th Street and Main Avenue, but became dissatisfied with the partnership and sold his interest to Griffin. In spring 1881, Cupits rented an old shack on the southeast corner of 4th Street and Broadway Avenue to re-establish a grocery and meat store. That operation proved prosperous and, within a few years, Cupits purchased the lot and constructed a new frame building. That building was one of the many destroyed by the 1898 fire, after which the store was temporarily housed within the Raymond Block, and the former Bain store on Main Avenue, until returning to its previous location inside his newly constructed 2-story brick building at 123 North 4th Street, today's Cowan Building, on November 17, 1898. The Cupits store occupied both floors of its namesake building and was partially lit by a skylight. It was hailed as the most extensive and handsomest grocery store west of St. Paul. Cupits retired in 1915, selling his grocery store to A.W. Lucas Company, who continued operating the Cuptis grocery store from the Lucas storefront directly across the street until closing it in 1921. Wachter Warehouse. The Wachter Warehouse was built that year, northeast corner of Front Avenue and 5th Street, to support its growing dray and transfer business. It later served as a warehouse for Winston Newell Company and, until 1957, for SuperValue. In 1991, the building was converted into a short-lived shopping mall called Times Square, anchored by the city's first TCBY. The mall venture failed almost immediately, but hung on with new owners until about 1993. Today, the building is a professional building. In honor of its heritage, the west side of the building proudly sports signage of 1986 and 1929. The years represent the founding of Wachter Dry and Transfer Company and the building's completion. The city of Bismarck acquired the building in about 2005 for about $1.85 million, investing an additional $1.6 million in renovations. It was at that time that Custer Family Planning, Baby Boutique, and Bismarck Burley Public Health occupied the building. As well, Bismarck State College operated a satellite campus for its nursing program on its eastern end for many years. Dakota National Bank. Dakota National Bank was founded in December 1929 when it assumed control of First Guarantee Bank. Numerous local historically significant citizens were original board officers, including John Fleck, Robert Webb, and 2 members of the Davis family. From inception, the financial institution was affiliated with Northwest Bank Corporation, which evolved into Norwest Bank in 1983 before merging with Wells Fargo in 1998. It seems that local ownership fully ceased in about 1988. For much of early existence, the bank was located at 212 North 4th Street. In 1956, it opened Bismarck's first drive-in bank at the rear of its 4th Street location. It later opened a second branch at 5th and Rosser, still a branch of Wells Fargo. The building was replaced in 1979. In 1970, Dakota National became the first bank to offer free checking accounts in Bismarck. In 1974, the bank reorganized as Dakota Northwestern Bank National Association. This same